It's time for the Douglas Coleman Show. Mr. Smooth and Savvy is joined by guests from all walks of life, from the entertainment industry to authors to political and social commentators, the famous and not so famous, the controversial and the light and fluffy. We have it all. Now, here's Douglas Coleman.
Okay, please welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show, Michael Meloan. Hi, Michael. How are you?
Good, thanks. How are you?
Good. Thank you for coming on the show. Nice to have you here. So you got a book out called Pinball Wizard. And I was reading through the bio, in your bio, and the description of the book. Mm-hmm. Is the book primarily about Charles Bukowski or your relationship with him?
Bukowski is a strong character in the book, but Pinball Wizard is a novella, and it was inspired by a particularly intense period of my life in 1981, where my parents were going through a very acrimonious divorce, and I had just begun to travel internationally for my job as a software engineer with the Department of Defense, and I was newly acquainted with Charles Bukowski. So the contrast between my day job involving Top Gun fighter pilots and the world of Bukowski, and also a new girlfriend who was a major drinker and drugger who was getting me in trouble with the defense establishment, mixing all of those things together, I felt made for an interesting vehicle to tell a compelling coming-of-age type story. So that's really what the book's about. It's not just about my relationship with Bukowski, although that is important.
How did you meet him?
Well, in 1980, my girlfriend Jan was working at a small health food restaurant in South Redondo Beach, L.A., and the owner of the restaurant, Linda Lee Beighle, was dating the poet Charles Bukowski. Jan told me that. And I had read Bukowski's column, Notes of a Dirty Old Man, in the L.A. Free Press when I was in high school. So I was already a fan of Bukowski, and through Jan, I, was able to wheedle an invitation to the house to meet Bukowski, which I wanted to do. And he and I pretty much hit it off immediately and became friends between 1980 and the time of his death in 1994.
You were a writer at that point, or you were still working in defense?
I imagined that. Yeah, I imagined that I wanted to be a writer, but I have to say at that point I hadn't really written anything of any merit, or, it was just in my mind. I always felt that someday I would be a writer. I just sort of felt that in my core, and I felt like meeting someone like Bukowski might be of help in that. And I wrote a short story a few years after I met him, and he was wildly enthusiastic about it and suggested that I send it to Larry Flint, where he had published material before. And then Flint bought that story and a couple more, so that really kind of kicked me off.
Larry Flint of Hustler magazine?
Hustler, right. Larry Flint had numerous magazines, but Hustler was the most famous magazine, yeah.
Okay, so your short story wasn't published in Hustler.
No, Larry Flint had a so-called champagne publication called Chic. So two of my short stories were in Chic instead of Hustler, because that's where he wanted to put, quote, the good stuff.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, because Hustler does sort of appeal to a certain demographic, and, your story...
That's true, yeah.
If your story has any serious literary merit, it might not be the best place to have it put.
Well, it was interesting dealing with the editors at the Flint organization. They were actually good, the people who worked for Flint. I mean, Flint had a genius for putting together potent and effective business organizations. But I remember that a female editor called me up and she said, listen, you got to be into your first hardcore scene at the bottom of page 1. So I had to modify my story a bit because they had their requirements.
Oh, I see. This was an adult story, short story?
Well, yeah, Flint, his fiction, it had to be X-rated. I mean, That's just what they did. It wasn't like Playboy where they'd publish Philip Roth or something. I mean, it had to be the real thing,
Okay, so this wasn't Harlequin romance.
No. Nope.
No, okay.
They wanted grit, they wanted sex, and it was X-rated stuff. But after 2 stories with Flint, I quit doing that because I didn't really want to be, a professional pornographer.
Was it difficult to write like that, or was it easy?
I found it fairly easy to write like that. Well, see, the first story was called Flyboys, and it was based on a group of airline pilots that I met in Orange County, and these guys really were kind of X-rated frat boy party animals. So it was pretty, I basically just chronicled what I had experienced with those guys.
Tell us briefly who Charles Bukowski was, in case there's people listening who don't know who he is or was.
Well, Bukowski was born in Germany. His birth name was Heinrich Karl Bukowski, and he was born in 1920, and then his parents immigrated to Los Angeles. But he, when he was young, he was a struggling, aspiring writer, but also he led a very unconventional life. He bummed around, he hung out with homeless people and so-called people who were called bums at the time. He hung out in bars, he hustled drinks, he hit the road and, wandered the country until he finally decided that Los Angeles was his place after all. All the while, he imagined being a writer, but he wasn't having much success with that. And he started, because he was sending out, he did get a few short stories published, but because he was not gaining much traction as a short story writer, he switched to poetry. And then he met a man named John Martin. And John Martin decided that Bukowski was a fantastic poet and wanted to found a press called Black Sparrow that was basically the mission of the press was to publish Charles Bukowski. And that set off John Martin and Bukowski together did everything that they imagined. I mean, with this press, Bukowski became world famous, and John Martin suggested to Bukowski that he write some novels, which he had never done before. And the first one, he cranked it out in about 5 weeks, called Post Office, and it became a phenomenon. It became a hit. So John Martin became wealthy from founding Black Sparrow Press, and then he started publishing other authors as well. But Bukowski was the backbone of that business. They both achieved their goals together. It was kind of amazing. But also Bukowski had a daughter named Marina, and because he needed to provide child support for his daughter, before he met John Martin, he was working at the post office. But then after he met John Martin said, I will support you so you can just quit working and just focus on your writing, which was a huge gamble for Bukowski because he didn't really know if the writing thing would support him. And John Martin didn't know if Bukowski's writing would be sufficient to found a whole business on. But so they both took the gamble on each other, and it worked out wonderfully.
Well, while you were describing his early life, Jack Kerouac came to mind. Were they running in the same circles at that time? Because they'd have been about the same age, right?
That's true. I had talked to Bukowski about the Beats, and there were always invitations to Bukowski to come up to City Lights, and City Lights actually published some Bukowski material. So there were invitations, but Bukowski was not really in with that crowd. I mean, I believe he met some of those guys, and he knew Ferlinghetti, but he wasn't really part of their scene because their scene was really San Francisco, and Bukowski was L.A., and So I wouldn't say they were friendly, or that they were part of the same cultural vein.
It's funny when you talk about scenes, because the world is so small today with the internet. I have trouble believing there's such a thing anymore.
Well, yeah, that's right. I agree with you. I mean, things were more balkanized in the past, where, there was a New York literary scene, there was a San Francisco literary scene, then there was a little bit of an LA literary scene. But, and those people kind of operated sort of in their own orbits.
Yeah, and now it's just all like one big, like you take 50 colors of paint and just sort of throw it all in one bowl and stir it all up, and you got this sort of color that you can't describe. And that's what the world feels like at this point, to me anyways.
Yeah, I think there's some truth in that, yeah. On the other hand, lots of people are able to, some people rise up from social media or YouTube and in ways that they wouldn't have been able to do in the past. And people self-publish all kinds of books, which mostly don't grab too much attention, but sometimes they do. So, there's a lot of opportunity today, I think, in ways that there wasn't in the past.
The other name that came to mind while you were describing Mr. Bukowski was Hunter Thompson.
Yeah, it's interesting about Hunter, because I remember sitting in Bukowski's living room once, and he said, "Jesus Christ, Hunter Thompson called me again." He said he wants to do a dual reading at the Bohemian cigar store in San Francisco. So Bukowski never did that, but Hunter Thompson thought it would be fun to have them both be on stage together, with the crowd heckling them and doing dueling readings, and which I thought would have been pretty good, actually. But Bukowski, he wouldn't do it.
Yeah, that would have been really good.
It never happened. Yeah.
Okay. Why did you take Pinball Wizard as the title? What is the significance of that?
Well, the protagonist of the book, his name is Ralph, which is based on me. Ralph's manager, in the middle of the night during a coding session in a nuclear-hardened bunker in England, his manager asks him, "Are you the pinball wizard or the pinball?" So I think that question really drives the whole book, in a sense. It's like Ralph is trying to figure out, he's being buffeted by various forces in his life. So is he going to take charge of this game, or is he just going to be the pinball? And the name Pinball Wizard is a fictitious name that I gave to a Department of Defense program at the end of the Cold War, which was designed to collect locations of surface-to-air missiles and deliver that data to Top Gun fighter pilots across Europe. And the goal was to plot, so the pilots could plot paths around those missiles, and in a doomsday scenario, deliver nuclear bombs within Russia and East Bloc countries. So that is actually derived from some work that I did for the DoD. But the name, it probably creates confusion, because it has absolutely nothing to do with The Who, and it has nothing to do with the Tommy, and it has nothing to do with those movies or anything. But I did like the notion of a person being either the pinball or the pinball wizard. Are you in charge of your life, or are you just the pinball? So that's really where that came from.
I'm looking on your bio. It says that you were good friends with NPR monologue artist Joe Frank. Now, I don't know who he is.
Yeah, Joe started out in New York, and then he came out to California to do radio monologues at KCRW, and he won a Peabody Award for his work as a radio monologue and dramatist. I think people should go to joefrank.com if they're interested in it, because Joe really was an incredibly creative artist. His work was philosophically deep. It was humorous. It was off the wall. And he sometimes used small casts of actors where he'd have small plays within the show. So it was monologue material with really inspired musical tracks that Joe put together that would drive his delivery. And he had this voice where he talked like this, and it was really, he's considered a breakthrough artist, like somebody who created a genre that didn't exist before. And I really believe he did do that. So he and I were friends, and I co-wrote some radio shows with him that aired across the NPR syndicate. So those were great experiences. He's gone now, but
so what time period was he active? Is this like from the 60s and 70s?
Yeah, late 70s to the time of his death in 2017.
Okay. You know what? I'm getting him confused with Joe Franklin.
That happens. People have said that before. I have heard of Joe Franklin. I don't really know who he is, but I've heard people make that confusion. Yeah.
Well, he was a talk show host, I think, in the 70s. I was young, and I didn't particularly like his show, as I remember. Because I found it really boring. I was much more of a Dick Cavett and Johnny Carson fan, I think, at that point.
I love Dick Cavett.
Yeah,
Dick Cavett was great. Yeah.
So, all right, well, let's bring this full circle and then wrap it up. So one of the things it says here about Joe Frank is that you used to have brunch with him at the Peninsula Hotel in Beverly Hills, and you would discuss sexual failure, amongst other things, since we were talking about Larry Flint at the beginning. I thought that would be a good way to bring this full circle. So what about sexual failure?
We talk about times when we were trying to woo a woman and maybe couldn't get it up, that sort of thing. But we would also discuss the meaning of everything. Does God exist? Are we here alone? Is there? What's it all about? Joe had taught philosophy and literature. He was hugely well educated. He could discuss almost anything. So the conversations were so wide ranging that. It was really, I think, the most scintillating and memorable conversations of my life, really, during those lunches. Tried to incorporate all of that into his shows, too. So his shows brought to bear all of his talents as a writer and a vocalist. It was really incredible material.
Well, I could kind of see how erectile dysfunction and is there a God could come up in the same thought,
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. I mean, I think
why would God be doing this?
Why would God be doing this, Why hast thou forsaken me? Yeah, I could see that.
Well, Joe is not really a believer. He would always tell me, because he knew that I meditated and I went to a meditation church, so he'd say, convince me. I want to believe. Give me something to believe in. Convince me of it, So we would have... So I was more spiritual than he was, but he was open to that. He would challenge me, convince me. I want to believe.
Well, I think that's the right attitude, because nobody knows, absolutely nobody knows. But yet there are billions of people on this planet that will go to their death believing that they're going somewhere else once the body dies. And it's been going on for thousands of years. So you have to, either you have absolutely zero confidence in mankind, or there's got to be something to it. And I guess we'll all find out when we die.
I guess we will. I'd like to say one more thing.
Sure.
My last name is spelled Meloan, and it's Pinball Wizard, and it's on Amazon.
Okay. Is there a website you want to give out?
Pinballwizardbook.com. So all run together, pinballwizardbook.com.
Okay, the book is out. How long has it been out?
Just about 6 weeks.
Okay. What kind of reviews you getting?
Oh, good reviews. Yeah.
Good. Yeah. All right, great. Well, all right, Michael, it was nice talking to you, and best of luck with the book. Hope it does well. Are you working on anything else right now?
Well, I have a screenplay version of the book, and I'm promoting that right now, so there's always something new.
Yeah, this would make an interesting film. That was a real yin-yang life that you lived, or are living. Are you still working at the DOD?
I am not, no.
Oh, okay. Well, okay, we're going to open up a whole can of worms there, so I'll leave it at that. But
right.
Anyways,
okay,
nice talking to you. Take care.
I enjoyed the conversation.